Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story, everyone. The crystal chandeliers sparkled in the grand ballroom of the Grand Regency Hotel in Dallas, casting reflections across the gold-plated walls and gleaming marble floors. The soft strains of violins mingled with the lively chatter of hundreds of guests, all dressed in their finest to witness the grand moment between Laura and James. Laura, 28, stood before the mirror in the bridal suite, her hands trembling as she adjusted the delicate white veil. The satin silk wedding gown hugged her figure, accentuating the elegance of a talented interior designer who had spent months personally planning every detail of this wedding day. She offered herself a small smile in the mirror, trying to shake off the vague sense of unease that had haunted her all week. "Laura, you look stunning," whispered Claire, her best friend and maid of honor, her eyes shimmering. But something in Claire's smile felt strained, as if she were hiding a secret. Laura brushed the thought aside, convincing herself it was just pre-wedding nerves. Taking a deep breath, she stepped out of the room, ready to face the future. The wedding hall bloomed with white roses and glowed with soft candlelight. Guests rose to their feet, all eyes turning to Laura as she walked slowly down the red carpet aisle. At the far end stood James, her fiancé, striking in a tailored black suit. He was the son of a powerful politician, a man she had loved for 2 years, though sometimes she questioned whether their love was truly deep or just perfectly aligned on paper. But today, she chose to believe in love. As Laura drew closer, the smile on James's face faded. He stepped forward and raised a hand to signal the orchestra to stop. The violins fell silent, and a heavy hush descended over the room. Laura felt her heart pound wildly, threatening to break through her chest. "James," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Laura," James said, his voice cold, void of emotion. "I'm sorry. I can't do this." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Laura froze, her mind blank. "I don't want to get married. Not to you. I've changed my mind." He turned and walked away, leaving Laura standing alone under the harsh gaze of hundreds of shocked, curious, and pitying eyes. The whispers escalated into noise. Camera flashes from the press began to explode around her, the white-hot lights cutting into Laura's dignity like knives. "Runaway bride," someone shouted from the crowd, and phones were raised to capture the most humiliating moment of her life. Claire rushed over, trying to pull Laura out of the spotlight, but Laura pushed her away. "Don't," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "I don't need pity." Laura turned, her wedding dress trailing behind like a ghost. She didn't run. She didn't cry. Not yet. She walked straight through the emergency exit at the edge of the hall, leaving behind the noise and the lights. Outside, the Dallas air was stifling, but she didn't stop. She climbed into the waiting taxi, not caring that her gown got caught in the car door. "Get me out of here," she told the driver, her voice choked. "Anywhere." Just hours later, the scandal had exploded across the news. Politician's son abandons bride at the altar. Cruel headlines called Laura a pitiful victim, or worse, a failed gold digger. Friends she once trusted began to pull away, some even publicly criticizing her on social media. Clients canceled contracts, claiming they didn't want to be associated with someone tainted by scandal. The interior design career Laura had spent years building suddenly crumbled beneath her. She couldn't stay in Dallas a moment longer. With a small suitcase packed with a few changes of clothes and still wearing her wedding gown, Laura boarded a midnight train out of the city. She had no plan, no destination in mind, only the need to find a place where no one knew her, where no one would look at her with pity. The train carried her to Wyoming, a remote, rugged land of rolling mountains and open skies that seemed to promise a new beginning. The Wyoming train station was tiny, just a crooked tin roof and a few old wooden benches. It was well past midnight, and not a soul was in sight. Laura sat down, her wedding dress now dusty and wrinkled, her heels kicked off beside her. She looked up at the sky, where the stars sparkled like they were whispering words of comfort, but it wasn't enough to ease the ache in her chest. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold back the tears. "What did I do wrong?" she whispered. She had given James her whole heart, planned a future she thought they'd share. She had dreamed of a warm home, of design projects completed with a smile, and now all of it had turned to ash. She thought of her mother, who always pressured her to marry the right man, and felt a surge of anger rise within her. "No," she said softly to herself, "I won't let this define me." Under the starlight, Laura stood and wiped her tears. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew she couldn't go back. Dallas, James, and all those broken dreams they had to be left behind. She grabbed her suitcase and stepped out of the station, ready to face whatever came next. Wyoming, though wild and unfamiliar, was a chance to find herself again. In that moment, Laura, the abandoned bride, began her journey toward becoming stronger than she had ever been. The sound of an engine broke the stillness of the night. A sleek black SUV pulled up in front of the train station, its headlights cutting through the darkness, making Laura squint. The door opened, and a man stepped out. He was tall, dressed in a dark gray suit, his stride confident but not arrogant. Under the dim glow of the street lamp, his features were sharp, his deep brown eyes locking onto Laura's, as if he had known her for a long time. Laura tightened her grip on her suitcase, her instincts on high alert. "You're Laura Bennett, aren't you?" His voice was deep, clear, and unwavering. Laura frowned, startled that someone would call her by name in such a desolate place. "I'm Luke Harrison," he continued, not waiting for her response. "I saw you on the news tonight. The abandoned bride in Dallas. Quite the spectacle." Laura stiffened, shame washing over her again like a fresh wound. "What do you want?" she asked coldly, masking the tremor in her voice. The last thing she needed was another gawker or a tabloid reporter. Luke stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "I'm not here to mock you," he said, pulling a phone from his coat pocket and scrolling quickly. He held the screen up to her, showing a headline. "Abandoned Bride. Wedding Scandal in Dallas. You're running away. I can help you, but I need something from you, too." Laura sprang to her feet, her wedding gown disheveled, hair a tangled mess. "I don't need your pity or anyone else's," she snapped. "If you're just here to gloat, then please leave." Luke remained unfazed. He crossed his arms, his expression calm but piercing. "I don't pity you. I need a wife on paper only to resolve a legal matter regarding my family's land. The contract lasts 6 months, no more. In return, I'll give you a place to stay. Somewhere, no one knows your name. You need a roof, Laura. I need a wife. We both get something out of it." His proposal hit like a slap, not because it was offensive, but because of how coldly direct it was. Laura stared at Luke, trying to detect a trace of mockery or a hidden agenda. But his face was blank, purely pragmatic. "You're talking about a fake marriage?" she asked, her voice low, part skeptical, part intrigued. "Exactly," Luke replied. "A clear contract. You'll live on my ranch in Wyoming. Act as my legal wife. I'll provide financial support, housing, and privacy. After 6 months, we part ways. No strings, no emotions." Laura let out a dry laugh, a bitter sound that echoed in the night. "You think I'm desperate enough to agree to be someone's fake wife just hours after being left at the altar?" Luke tilted his head slightly, a glimmer of amusement in his eyes. "I think you're smart enough to recognize an opportunity when it's in front of you. You have nowhere to go, Laura. Dallas isn't your home anymore. I'm offering a way out." She wanted to argue, to tell him to go to hell, but his words struck a painful truth. She had nothing left in Dallas, no friends, no career, not even her dignity. Wyoming was unfamiliar, but maybe that was exactly what she needed, a place to rebuild. Laura took a deep breath and met Luke's gaze. "If I agree, I want to see the contract, and I want my own terms." Luke gave a faint smile, the first sign of emotion on his face. "You're tougher than I expected." "Good. I prefer working with people who know what they want." He opened the SUV's rear door, gesturing for her to get in. "Come on, we'll go over the details at my office." He pulled out his phone and called his lawyer. The drive took them to a small but modern building in a nearby town, where Luke maintained a temporary office. Inside, warm light from a desk lamp lit up shelves of books and a large table where a contract was already prepared. Laura sat down, her dress dusty from the road, but her eyes sharp and focused. Luke's lawyer arrived and handed her the contract. She read every line, every clause, with the scrutiny of a designer inspecting blueprints. The agreement was clear. Laura would play the role of Luke Harrison's wife for 6 months, attend public events as needed, and stay out of his personal affairs. In return, she would receive a financial settlement sufficient to start over after the contract ended, as well as housing and protection from the media. But the final clause made her pause. "No emotional involvement between parties allowed." "This needs to change," Laura said, tapping her finger on the table. "I want to add a clause. I'm free to use my time at the ranch as I see fit, as long as it doesn't interfere with my role. I won't be a puppet." Luke raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by her assertiveness. "You want freedom, Fine. But understand this. My ranch has rules. You'll be expected to follow them. I will, Laura replied, eyes locked with his. But I'm not your employee. I'm a partner in this deal. After a brief silence, Luke nodded. All right. I'll add the clause. He revised the document on his laptop, printed a new copy, and slid it across the table along with a pen. Sign it, Laura Bennett. From now on, you're my wife on paper. Laura picked up the pen, her hand trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of the decision. She signed her name, each stroke a declaration that she would no longer let her past define her. When she was done, Luke extended his hand. Welcome to Wyoming, Mrs. Harrison. She shook his hand, feeling the strength and cool control in his grip. But in Luke's eyes, Laura caught a flicker of something else, perhaps curiosity or something deeper he wasn't ready to show. She wasn't sure, but she knew one thing. This was her first step toward taking back her life. Luke Harrison's SUV glided along winding red dirt roads, leading Laura deep into the Wyoming mountains. The early morning light filtered across endless fields of grass, where the towering peaks shimmered faintly through wisps of mist. Sitting in the back seat, Laura wore a simple sweater and jeans from her suitcase, having changed out of the wedding dress, but she still felt out of place, like she was stepping into a world that wasn't hers. The marriage contract she'd signed just hours ago still clung to her mind, a reminder that she wasn't truly Mrs. Harrison, only a component of a transaction. The vehicle stopped in front of tall iron gates, opening to reveal a sprawling estate. The ranch was modern, almost too modern for the wild surroundings. The main house was made of wood and glass, with clean architectural lines that looked more like an award-winning design than a home. Surrounding it were stables, a greenhouse, and neatly kept fields, all pristine but oddly lifeless. Laura stepped out, inhaling the crisp mountain air, trying to shake her unease. Luke led her inside, his strides brisk, his demeanor impersonal. Sophia will show you to your room, he said, tone flat as if reading a report. You can move freely around the house, but stay out of my office. Dinner's at 7. Be on time. No smile. No welcome. Laura nodded silently, but irritation flared inside her. She wasn't his employee. From the hallway emerged a petite woman with neatly tied salt and pepper hair. I'm Sophia, she said warmly, her voice a stark contrast to Luke's chill. Welcome to Harrison Ranch. Miss Laura, don't let Mr. Luke scare you. He's just not great with people. Her sincere smile made Laura smile back almost involuntarily. Sophia led her upstairs to a spacious room with large windows overlooking the mountains. The furnishings were simple wooden bed, wardrobe, a small writing desk, but everything was clean and functional. This will be your room, Sophia said, placing a reassuring hand on Laura's shoulder. If you need anything, I'm always in the kitchen downstairs. Laura nodded, feeling like she'd found an unexpected ally. After Sophia left, Laura unpacked the few clothes she had and stood by the window, gazing out at the ranch. The glass walls of the house reflected the sunlight, but couldn't hide the coldness inside. As an interior designer, Laura had a keen sensitivity to space. This house had potential modern lines, open design, but it lacked warmth. It lacked soul. And that thought sparked something in her, a vague but growing idea that maybe, just maybe, she could change that, if only to remind herself that she still existed beyond being someone's fake wife. That afternoon, Laura explored the ranch. She walked through a small garden where wildflowers grew in disorganized clusters, then peeked into the greenhouse, where the plants were well tended but lacked creative flair. The stables were nearly empty, housing only a few horses cared for by a tall, sun-bronzed man with a friendly smile. I'm Diego, security around here, he said, shaking her hand. You're the first person Luke's brought here in years. Welcome, Senora Harrison. He winked. Laura offered a faint smile in return, still getting used to the new title. Diego told her about the ranch, how Luke had turned it from barren land into a high-value property while keeping it isolated from the outside world. He likes his privacy, Diego said, voice lowering, but sometimes I think he's lonelier than he admits. Laura didn't respond, but the words lingered in her mind. Luke Harrison, this cold, sharp-eyed man, what was he hiding beneath that fortress-like exterior? At 7 sharp, Laura entered the large dining room, where a long wooden table was set simply but elegantly. Luke was already seated at the head of the table, skimming through a file without looking up as she entered. Sophia brought in roast beef and potatoes, smiling at Laura before retreating to the kitchen. Laura sat down, feeling more like she was at a board meeting than a family dinner. Are you settled in? Luke asked, voice flat. eyes still on the document. "I am," Laura replied calmly, "but I have a few questions. What exactly am I supposed to do here? I mean, besides playing your wife?" Luke finally looked up, his gaze sharp, as if measuring her. "Do whatever you like, as long as you don't interfere with me. The contract's clear. Show up when I need you. Stay quiet when I don't. Simple." Laura clenched her fork. Being treated like a tool was getting under her skin. "I'm not your employee, Luke. I agreed to be a partner in this arrangement, not a puppet. If I'm here, I want purpose." He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise crossing his face, before quickly vanishing. "Purpose?" he repeated with a touch of sarcasm. "What do you want? Redecorate my house? Open a boutique in the mountains?" "Maybe both," Laura replied without flinching. "This place is beautiful, but it's not a home. It feels like a showroom. I could help change that." Luke put down the file for the first time, giving her his full attention. "You think you can do something with a house that doesn't belong to you?" "I'm an interior designer," Laura said firmly. "I know how to turn a space into a home. If you'll allow it, I'd like to start with the kitchen. It needs warmth." Luke was quiet for a moment, studying her as though deciding whether this was a challenge or an offer. Finally, he nodded. "Do what you want. Just don't expect me to be involved." Laura gave a faint smile, her first real sense of control. "I don't need you to be. Just don't get in my way." After dinner, Sophia pulled Laura aside, her eyes sparkling. "You did well, dear," she whispered. "Luke's not used to being challenged, but I saw the way he looked at you. Something's different. He doesn't open up easily, but keep being yourself. He needs that more than he knows." Laura nodded, Sophia's words igniting a spark of curiosity. Who was Luke really, beneath all that coldness and formality? Why did a man like him need a fake marriage in the first place? Back in her room, Laura stood by the window. The mountains bathed in silver moonlight. A new determination settled in her chest. She wasn't here just to survive. She would leave her mark. Morning sunlight streamed through the large glass windows of the Harrison Ranch kitchen, casting a warm glow over a space that still felt cold. The stainless steel cabinets gleamed, the black granite countertops pristine. Everything perfect, yet soulless, like a painting that hadn't been colored in. Laura stood in the center of the room, holding a cup of coffee, her eyes scanning every corner. After 3 days at the ranch, she had made a decision. She wouldn't just be a ghost in this house. She wouldn't just play the part of a hired wife. As the contract with Luke Harrison dictated, she was Laura Bennett, an interior designer, and if she had to stay here for 6 months, she would leave her mark. Setting the coffee down, she pulled out an old sketchbook from her suitcase, where she kept all her design ideas, and began scribbling notes. Soft beige curtains to soften the light, a hand-woven rug for warmth, a few potted plants to bring life into the space. This kitchen, she thought, should be the heart of the home. Not just a place to cook. She thought back to her days in Dallas, transforming tiny apartments into cozy havens for clients. If she could do that for others, she could do it for herself, and for this ranch. Sophia, the kind-hearted housekeeper, entered, carrying a basket of fresh vegetables from the garden. "You're up early, Miss Laura," she said with a smile that brightened the room. "Need any help?" Laura smiled back and pointed at her sketchbook. "I want to warm up this kitchen, Sophia. It feels sterile. I think we can make it a place where people actually want to gather. What do you think?" Sophia tilted her head, looked around, and then nodded emphatically. "I agree. Mister, Luke never pays attention to things like this. As long as it's clean and working, that's all he cares about. But I know he'd like it, though he'll never admit it." She winked, making Laura laugh. The two spent the entire day working together. Laura rearranged the open shelves, placing jars of herbs and spices where they were visible, adding a touch of charm. She found some old cotton fabric in the storage room and stitched together makeshift curtains to soften the sunlight. A small wooden table was pulled to the center of the kitchen, covered with a cream-colored cloth, and a vase of wildflowers from the garden served as the centerpiece. Laura even borrowed a few tools from Diego, the ranch's security guard, to build a small wooden shelf for Sophia's cookbooks. By afternoon, Laura decided to prepare a special dinner. She made homemade pasta with fresh tomato sauce, a green salad, and garlic bread. The aroma of herbs and simmering tomatoes wafted through the kitchen, stopping Diego mid-step as he passed by. "Madre mia, Miss Laura, you've turned this place into a restaurant," he laughed, making Laura blush. Sophia laid a hand on her shoulder, her eyes glistening. "You remind me of my mother. She used to say, 'The kitchen is the soul of the home.' You're bringing that soul back, my dear." Laura smiled, warmth rising in her chest. Once she had dreamed of a home with James, but now she was building something new, even if temporary. This isn't my home, she reminded herself, but I can make it feel like one, at least for 6 months. At 7 sharp, Luke entered the dining room as usual, with his signature frown and a stack of documents in hand. But this time, he paused at the threshold. His eyes swept across the kitchen. The new curtains softened the light. The small table with its wildflower centerpiece added intimacy, and the smell of dinner lingered in the air, warm and inviting. He said nothing but sat down at the head of the table, and Laura noticed that he looked around longer than usual. Sophia and Diego joined for dinner, a rare occurrence in Laura's time at the ranch. The table buzzed with life as Diego shared funny stories about the horses, and Sophia reminisced about her early days on the ranch. Laura quietly observed, proud that the space she had created was bringing people together. But Luke remained distant, eating in silence, though his eyes occasionally drifted her way. After dinner, once Sophia and Diego had left, Luke stood and looked directly at Laura. "What did you do to the kitchen?" he asked, not accusatory, but edged with suspicion. "I didn't ask you to change anything." Laura stood tall, meeting his gaze without flinching. "You said I could use my time how I wanted. I'm an interior designer, Luke. I can't live in a place that has no soul. That kitchen, it needed warmth, and I think everyone here needed it, including you." Luke's brow furrowed. He clearly wasn't used to being talked back to. "This is my house, Laura, not your project." "Your house?" She shot back, her voice firm but calm. "It feels more like an office. You might be able to live like that, but I can't. If I have to be here, I'm going to make it livable." She paused, realizing she might have pushed too far, but she didn't take the words back. Luke stared at her, his expression unreadable, torn between irritation and something else. At last, he gave a small nod. "Do what you want, but don't expect me to thank you." He turned and walked out of the room. But Laura noticed, before disappearing through the door, he glanced back at the kitchen once more. Later, as Laura was washing dishes, Sophia came to her side, grinning. "You rattled him, you know," she said, chuckling. "He's not used to people standing their ground, but I saw how he looked at you. It was different. You're doing great, Laura. Don't stop now." Laura nodded, her hands still in the soapy water, but her heart lighter than it had been in days. She wasn't just changing the kitchen, she was reclaiming herself, and whether Luke Harrison admitted it or not, she knew he was paying attention. A small part of her wondered what he would do if she kept challenging him. That night, as she returned to her room and looked out at the quiet ranch under moonlight, Laura smiled to herself. It felt like she'd won a small battle. Wyoming, for all its wildness, was becoming a place where she could stand tall again. Morning sunlight blanketed the Harrison Ranch in a peaceful glow, casting a soft light over the kitchen Laura had recently transformed. The beige curtains and vase of wildflowers brought warmth to the space. A small change, but one that made Laura feel like she was slowly reclaiming herself. Standing by the living room window, a cup of tea in hand, she looked out over the rolling fields and felt lighter than she had since arriving in Wyoming. The scandal in Dallas, where she'd been abandoned at the altar by James, still lingered like an old wound, but she was learning how to rise again. That peace, however, didn't last. The sound of an approaching engine broke the quiet, coming from the dirt road leading to the ranch. Laura frowned as a sleek black sedan pulled up to the iron gates. Diego, the ranch's guard, stepped out of the stables, eyes narrowing with alertness. As the gate opened, Laura's heart clenched. Stepping out of the car was none other than James, her ex-fiancé, in a deep navy suit, hair perfectly combed, and wearing that same arrogant smirk she knew too well. Beside him was a middle-aged man in glasses, holding a briefcase. Clearly a lawyer. But what stunned Laura more than anything was the look in James's eyes, not just aimed at her, but burning with hostility. As if he had come to claim something far greater than just a person, Laura tightened her grip on the teacup, forcing down the surge of anger. She never expected James to track her to Wyoming, a place she thought she'd finally escaped him. The doorbell rang, and Sophia, the housekeeper, emerged from the kitchen, her expression filled with concern. "Miss Laura, do you want me to call Mr. Luke?" she asked. Laura shook her head and stood tall. "No, Sophia, I'll handle it." She set the cup down, took a deep breath, and walked toward the front door. She was no longer the fragile bride from Dallas. Wyoming had given her ground to stand on, and she wasn't about to let James take that from her. At the gate, James leaned against the car, his gaze sweeping over her like she was just a small piece in a much larger game. "Laura," he said smoothly, voice dripping with mockery, "you ran off to become the wife of a man like Harrison. That's disappointing." Laura stepped forward, her gaze unwavering. "What do you want, James? I'm not part of your life anymore." The man beside him finally spoke, voice flat and legalistic. "I'm Edward Vance, Mr. Caldwell's attorney. We're here to inform you that your marriage to Mr. Luke Harrison is invalid. You are still legally engaged to Mr. Caldwell under a contract that has not been formally dissolved. We request that you cease this conduct, or we will pursue legal action." Laura felt heat rise to her face. "Invalid?" she snapped. "You left me in front of hundreds of people, James. You think you still have any legal claim over me?" Before James could reply, a deep voice cut through the tension. "She doesn't belong to you, Caldwell, and neither does this land." Luke Harrison appeared from the house, calm in his posture, but with eyes like sharpened steel. He stood beside Laura, tall and unyielding, and Laura noticed something else in his gaze as he looked at James, not just anger, but familiarity. James smirked, a flash of triumph in his eyes. "Harrison, long time no see. Still clinging to this land? I thought you'd have learned your lesson after the last time we crossed paths." Laura turned to Luke, surprise flickering in her eyes. They knew each other. Luke didn't look at her. His eyes were locked on James. "The last time you tried to steal my Colorado project, Caldwell, you failed. This won't be any different." Laura's heart beat faster. Colorado a project. Luke had never mentioned this, but clearly there was a deeper rivalry at play. James stepped forward, still smiling. "This time is different. Laura is my fiancée, and your fake marriage won't cover up the fact that you're using her in a legal loophole to keep this property. Back down, or I'll take both of you down." The fire inside Laura surged past fear. She stepped in front of James, eyes blazing. "I am no longer your fiancée, James. I am Luke Harrison's legal wife." She reached out and grabbed Luke's hand, squeezing it, not just to prove a point, but to send a message. She wasn't the same girl he once abandoned. "You have no claim here. Leave." James froze, clearly stunned by her defiance. Luke, beside her, glanced at her with a flicker of surprise and something else, respect. He returned the hand squeeze, then looked back at James. "Your lawyer should check the paperwork again. Caldwell, our marriage is certified and legal, and if you think you can use the same tricks you tried in Colorado, you're mistaken. I beat you once. I'll do it again." Vance took a small step back, muttering something about needing further review. James, still trying to maintain his swagger, pointed a finger at Laura. "You'll regret this, Laura. And Harrison, you know I don't stop." With that, he turned and got back in the car, followed by his lawyer, leaving a trail of dust behind them on the dirt road. When the sedan disappeared from view, Laura realized she was still holding Luke's hand. She let go, face warming slightly, and turned away to mask her embarrassment. "Thank you," she said softly, but firmly. "And Colorado, what happened between you two?" Luke looked at her, his eyes now softer than usual. 3 years ago, the Caldwell family tried to undercut me on a massive real estate deal in Colorado. James led the charge: bribes, legal threats, dirty tactics. I won, but he never let it go. Now he's targeting this ranch, and you're just part of his leverage." He paused, then added in a lower voice, "But you handled that well, Laura. I didn't expect you to stand up to him like that." Laura gave a small, confident smile. "You don't know me very well yet, Luke, and if James wants to play dirty, I'm not letting you fight him alone." She turned and walked back into the house, leaving Luke standing there, watching her with new curiosity. That evening, in the living room, Sophia and Diego buzzed with excitement as they heard the story. "You shut him down," Diego laughed, slapping the table. Sophia clasped Laura's hands, her eyes gleaming. "You're stronger than you think, dear. And Mr. Luke saw it, too." Laura nodded, though her thoughts were spinning with everything she'd learned about Luke and James. A past rivalry, a battle unfinished. She looked out the window, moonlight glinting over the ranch. She wasn't just defending herself anymore. She was stepping into a bigger fight. And for the first time, she felt ready. Sunset cast a golden-orange glow across the Harrison ranch, blanketing the grassy fields and pine woods, with a brilliant light tinged by a strange sense of unease. Laura stood by the living room window, staring out toward the distant mountains, her heart still unsettled after that morning's confrontation with James. Grabbing Luke's hand and declaring herself his wife had made her feel stronger than ever. But it also left a lingering question. Who exactly was she in Luke Harrison's world? A fake wife, a contract partner, or something beginning to drift beyond those boundaries. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed down the hall. Diego, the ranch's security guard, pushed open the door, his tanned face tight with concern. "Miss Laura, can you get Mr. Luke? I found something near the west fence. Footprints. Someone's lurking in the woods." Laura nodded, her heartbeat quickening. She rushed upstairs and knocked on the door of Luke's office, where he often shut himself away after dinner. Luke opened the door, his eyes immediately sharp when he heard Diego's report. "Footprints, some broken branches, and tire marks," Diego said, his voice low and grim. "Not locals." Whoever it was knew how to avoid the cameras. Luke crossed his arms, his gaze darkening. "Caldwell," he muttered, his voice like ice. "He didn't stop after this morning. He's trying to sabotage the land. And he knows our marriage is the key to me keeping it." Laura's brow furrowed, anxiety rising in her chest. "Sabotage? What do you mean?" Luke turned to her, and his eyes now held not just cold calculation, but a fierce resolve. "This land's been in my family for generations, but there's an old legal clause that requires me to be married to retain ownership. James and his family are trying to challenge that, and they'll do anything to ruin it, even physical sabotage." Without another word, Luke left the office, motioning for Laura and Diego to follow. "We're stepping up security. Laura, you need to learn how to defend yourself. If something happens, I want you ready." Laura nodded, even as fear crept into her spine. She wasn't used to danger or violence, but she knew she couldn't be the weak link. At dusk, Luke brought Laura to an open stretch of land behind the stables, where he had set up a makeshift shooting range. A handgun rested on a wooden table beside a few boxes of ammunition. The setting sun cast a red tint over Luke's chiseled face, revealing the tension he usually masked behind composure. "Have you ever fired a gun?" he asked, his voice level, not cold, but serious. Laura shook her head, hands clasped tightly to hide the tremble. "Never. But I want to learn." Luke nodded, handed her the gun, and began to guide her through the basics. How to grip it firmly, how to aim. When her stance wavered, he stepped in close, placing his hand over hers to adjust her form. His touch was steady, warm, so unlike his usual clipped demeanor. "Hold it steady, but don't lock up," he said, his breath brushing her ear, making her cheeks flush. Laura took a deep breath, locked her gaze on the wooden target a few dozen feet away, and fired. The bullet went wide, so wide she muttered a curse under her breath. Luke chuckled softly, an unexpected sound that made her turn toward him in surprise. "You'll get better," he said, eyes gentler now. "But you need to believe in yourself. You're not weak, Laura. I saw that this morning." His words made her stand straighter. She fired again and again. The shots still weren't perfect, but they got closer. "I don't want to be a burden," she said, lowering the gun, her gaze steady. "Teach me how to protect this place. I'm here. I'll do my part." Luke looked at her for a long moment, his eyes scanning her face as if seeing her for the first time. "All right," he said quietly but firmly. "You'll learn, and I'll make sure you're safe." That night, the tension over the ranch thickened. Luke, Diego, and Laura took turns patrolling the grounds, carrying flashlights and radios. The pine forest that once seemed serene now felt haunted. Every snapping twig sent chills down Laura's spine. She walked beside Luke, a handgun holstered at her side, her heart pounding. But she held her composure. They stopped near the west fence line, where Diego had discovered the traces. Luke crouched under the flashlight beam, examining the ground. "They were here last night," he said, pointing to a faint tire mark. "They're scouting. We need to be ready for anything." Laura nodded, her nerves taut. "Do you really think James is behind this?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Luke stood, his expression sharpened. "I don't think. I know. He wants to destroy me, and he knows you're part of the reason he can't. But I won't let him touch you, Laura." His words, unexpectedly protective, struck something deep inside her. She looked at him longer than she meant to. Amid the darkness of the woods, trust quietly began to grow between them. They continued their patrol, walking shoulder to shoulder, flashlight beams cutting through the trees. When a sudden rustle erupted from the bushes, Laura instinctively raised her gun, hands trembling, but her eyes focused. Luke reached out, placing a firm hand on her shoulder, steadying but gentle. "Easy," he murmured. "Just a deer." She exhaled shakily, lowering the weapon, but his hand lingered a moment longer, grounding her. She wasn't alone. By the time they returned to the house, it was late. Luke stopped at the door and looked at her. "You did good tonight," he said, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "You didn't have to prove anything, but you did. Get some rest. We'll keep going tomorrow." Laura nodded, offering a small smile. "Thank you, Luke, for believing in me." She stepped inside, feeling like she had crossed an invisible line. She wasn't just learning how to defend the ranch. She was learning how to defend herself. Upstairs in his office, Luke sat alone, a glass of whiskey untouched in his hand. His eyes lingered on the door Laura had just walked through. The image of her holding the gun, shaky but determined, refused to leave his mind. She was no longer just a part of the deal. She was someone he wanted to protect, and that terrified him more than he'd ever admit. Rain poured over the Harrison ranch like a heavy curtain, cloaking the moonlight and turning the grassy fields into a sea of shadow. Thunder rumbled above as wind howled through the pine trees, thickening the tension that hung in the air. Laura stood in the living room, eyes fixed on the window, where raindrops pelted the glass in rhythmic fury. After the encounter with James and the strange signs in the forest, Luke had acted swiftly. He'd hired a professional security team, 7 well-trained men, armed with radios and weapons patrolling the property around the clock. Diego, the longtime guard, remained in charge. But the presence of the new team brought both reassurance and a grim reminder. Luke wasn't just protecting the ranch. He was preparing for war. In the kitchen, Sophia busied herself making coffee, trying to preserve some sense of normalcy. "Miss Laura, you should get some rest," she said, worry lacing her voice. "Luke's new security team is excellent. No one's getting past them." But Laura shook her head, her hand instinctively brushing the handgun at her waist. Ever since the shooting lesson with Luke, she had kept it close, not out of confidence, but out of sheer resolve not to be anyone's burden. Luke entered the living room wearing a rain jacket, his expression sharp as ever. "Laura, stay inside tonight," he ordered, voice leaving no room for argument. "Diego and the team are on patrol. If anything happens, I'll handle it." Laura frowned at his tone. "I've learned to shoot, Luke. I can help." She stepped toward him, gaze steady. "I don't want to just watch. This is where I live, too." Luke studied her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes before it disappeared behind his usual mask. "Stay with Sophia." "That's an order." He turned away, but Laura noticed the tension in his shoulders. He wasn't just protecting the ranch. He was protecting her. As night deepened, the rain fell harder. Laura and Sophia sat in the dimly lit living room, the beige curtains Laura had hung, now swaying with the draft. Suddenly, a loud bang rang out near the front gate, followed by frantic shouts through Diego's radio. "Intruders, west side. They cut the fence." Laura shot to her feet, heart pounding. Sophia grabbed her arm, panic in her eyes. "Miss Laura, stay here." But Laura shook her off, drawing her gun. "I have to help. Lock the door and call the police." Without waiting for a response, she dashed out the back, the chaotic noise growing closer. Rain slapped her face, blurring her vision, but she could see figures through the downpour. Diego and 2 guards struggling against a group of masked men dressed in black. Luke's team was skilled, but they were outnumbered at least 6 intruders. All armed, Laura ducked behind a tree, forcing herself to breathe steadily. From the stables, Luke's voice rang out, clear and commanding. "Diego, hold the left side. Don't let them near the house." But one intruder had broken past the others, moving silently toward Luke, a knife gleaming in the flash of lightning. Luke, occupied with another attacker, didn't see the threat coming. Laura didn't think she acted. She raised her gun, hands trembling, and aimed for the attacker's leg. She exhaled sharply and pulled the trigger. The gunshot cracked through the storm. The man dropped to the ground with a cry of pain, clutching his leg. Luke spun around, his eyes meeting Laura's in a moment of stunned disbelief. "Laura!" he shouted, rushing toward her just as another attacker opened fire. He tackled her to the ground, shielding her as bullets sliced through the air. The assault was fast and chaotic. Though overwhelmed at first, Luke's security team regained control, managing to subdue 3 of the intruders. The rest fled into the woods, leaving behind the wounded man Laura had shot. Police arrived moments later, called by Sophia, and took custody of the injured attacker, collecting statements from the shaken but safe residents. As the danger passed and the rain continued to fall, silence returned to the ranch, broken only by the heavy breaths of those who had fought. Luke pulled Laura inside, his coat soaked through, wet hair clinging to his forehead. He gripped her shoulders, his eyes raw with an emotion she had never seen before. "You saved my life, Laura," he said, voice low, gentle, for the first time calling her Laura instead of Miss Bennett. but don't ever put yourself in danger like that again. I can't lose you." Still shaking from adrenaline, Laura met his gaze. "I couldn't just stand by, Luke. This isn't just your home anymore. I'm trying to belong here too." Her words brought silence between them, but Luke's eyes softened, the walls around him visibly cracking. Without another word, he pulled her into a tight embrace, his warmth seeping through their rain-soaked clothes. Laura froze for a beat, then relaxed against him. She felt his heartbeat, strong and chaotic, like he had just faced his greatest fear, losing her. In that moment, amid the storm and chaos, they crossed the boundary of their agreement for the very first time. When they pulled apart, Luke didn't let go of her hand. His eyes never left hers. "You're more than a contract to me," he said, his voice husky and honest. "Thank you, Laura." She smiled, a quiet glow spreading in her chest, like a missing piece had finally clicked into place. In the kitchen, Sophia and Diego waited, equal parts worried and proud. "Miss Laura, you're a warrior." Diego cheered, clapping his hands. Sophia hugged her tightly, whispering, "I knew you were special. And now, Mr. Luke knows, too." Laura blushed, but didn't deny it. She glanced at Luke, who stood in the doorway, his gaze still fixed on her, changed, softened, protective in a way that made her feel seen. That night, back in her room, Laura stood at the window, watching the rain lighten into mist. She hadn't just survived tonight, she had fought back and won. The Harrison Ranch, once just a place of refuge, now felt like something more. Home. And Luke Harrison, the cold, guarded man she once thought of as nothing but a business partner, was slowly becoming something far more dangerous and far more precious to her heart. The morning after the attack, the Harrison Ranch was cloaked in a quiet that felt profound. The rain had passed, leaving the grassy fields glistening under the soft light of dawn. Laura woke in her room, the memories of the night before gunfire, rain, and Luke Harrison's unexpected embrace still fresh and lingering in her chest. As she stepped out into the hallway, she noticed something different. The air inside the house felt lighter, as if the violence had somehow cleared away a silent wall that had once stood between them. Downstairs in the kitchen, the scent of toast and coffee wafted through the air. But what surprised Laura wasn't the smell, it was the sight of Luke, not Sophia, standing at the counter, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. He wore a pale blue button-down, sleeves rolled up, looking more relaxed than she had ever seen him. When he saw her, he slid one of the mugs her way, and his eyes held a softness she didn't recognize. "Good morning," he said, his voice low and calm. "I figured you deserved to be served for once after everything last night." Laura took the mug, the warmth seeping into her palms. "Thank you," she replied, slightly flustered by his sudden change. "You didn't have to do that, Luke." A faint smile crossed his face. "I wanted to." He paused, eyes drifting to the window. "I'd like to take you for a walk. Just us. There's a trail behind the ranch. It's beautiful this time of day." The invitation caught her off guard. Laura looked up, meeting his eyes. She nodded, sensing this wasn't just a casual walk. It was something more, a step forward. The trail meandered through tall pine trees, sunlight streaming through the branches in golden shafts that danced across the ground. Laura walked beside Luke, wrapped in a light jacket, her hair tied loosely. She felt freer than she had in years. Luke walked in silence beside her, but the quiet wasn't awkward. It was thoughtful, like the calm between breaths before something important is said. Finally, Luke spoke. "I never properly thanked you," he said, his voice husky. "Last night, you didn't just save my life. You protected this place. I didn't think you had it in you, Laura." Laura smiled faintly, her eyes on the distant mountains. "I didn't think I had it in me either, but I couldn't just stand by. Not here. Not with you." She paused, surprised by the raw honesty in her words. Luke stopped walking and turned to her. His gaze was deep, searching. "I never told you about my father," he said, his voice dropping. "He died when I was 20. He built this ranch, every inch of it, not just the land, but what it stood for. After he passed, I was betrayed. A close friend, someone I trusted like a brother, tried to take my real estate company. He worked with the Caldwells, yes, those Caldwells, to push me out. I fought back and won, but I stopped trusting people after that." Laura listened in silence, her heart heavy. She hadn't expected Luke to open up this way. That the Caldwells, James's family, had once betrayed him, too, added a deeper twist to their shared past. "That's why you keep people at a distance," she said quietly. "Why you needed this contract." Luke nodded slowly, his eyes flickering toward her. I thought a contract would make things simple. No feelings, no risks. But you," he hesitated, like the words didn't come easy. "You weren't what I expected." Laura smiled gently, her heart fluttering. She took a breath, then decided to share her own truth. "My mother always wanted me to marry someone wealthy, someone like James. She said that's how I'd succeed. I tried to make her proud, tried to believe in that life, but every time I looked at James, I knew I didn't love him. I loved the idea of a family, a home, but not with him. When he left me at the altar, I thought I had failed. But here, I've realized I don't need her or him to know who I am." Luke's eyes softened in the warm afternoon light. "You didn't fail, Laura. You're stronger than anyone I've ever met." He stepped closer, the distance between them narrowing. "I need to ask you something. If there were no contract, would you stay with me?" His question struck her like a chord. She met his eyes, seeing the rare vulnerability he didn't bother to hide. "I don't know," she said honestly, her voice soft but unwavering. "But I know I don't want to leave, not because of a contract, but because I want to see what this could be between us." A real smile, the kind she'd never seen on him, spread across Luke's face. He reached up and gently touched her cheek. "Then let's find out," he said, voice warm. "No contracts, no terms, just you and me." They returned to the ranch as the sun began to set, the sky painted in hues of golden rose. The kitchen welcomed them with soft light, and the faint sound of dishes clinking. Sophia glanced up from the counter, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "You two look different," she said with a knowing grin. "Keep going like that, Miss Laura. Mr. Luke needs someone like you." Laura blushed but didn't deny it. She glanced at Luke, standing at the threshold of the room, and caught him still watching her, his expression tender, quiet, and unguarded. In that moment, Laura felt something settle in her chest. The Harrison Ranch, once a place of escape, was becoming something deeper, and Luke Harrison, once just a line in a legal agreement, was slowly becoming part of the home her heart had been searching for all along. The greenhouse at Harrison Ranch shimmered under warm golden string lights, wildflowers and lush green vines wrapped around the beams and windows, transforming the once cold structure into a place of warmth and life. Laura stood at its center, her hand clenched around an old engagement ring, James's ring, a remnant of Dallas, a relic of a past she was finally ready to release. Tonight, Luke had arranged a small dinner, just the two of them, Sophia and Diego. The wooden table was simple but heartfelt. Homemade bread, wine, grilled meat, but Laura knew this wasn't just dinner. It was a turning point. She walked to the small fireplace tucked in the corner of the greenhouse. The ring glinted in the firelight, no longer holding any power over her. "I've held on to this too long," she said, her voice steady, echoing in the quiet space. "It doesn't belong to me anymore." With a swift motion, she tossed the ring into the flames. The fire licked at the metal, devouring the symbol of everything she had survived. Sophia clapped, her eyes shining. Diego let out a celebratory whistle. Luke rose, wineglass in hand, eyes locked on Laura. "I have something to say," he began, voice low and sure. "Our contract ends tonight. I don't want it anymore." He set the glass down and stepped toward her. "Laura, you've changed this place, and you've changed me. I want something real. No terms, no clauses. Will you start again with me?" Laura's heart pounded. She looked into his eyes and saw no trace of the cold man who once proposed a marriage of convenience. "I want that too," she whispered, her voice trembling but resolute. "Not because of a contract, but because of you." Luke smiled, lifted her chin, and in the golden light of the greenhouse, they shared their first kiss, gentle, warm, overflowing with all the feelings they had kept buried. Sophia and Diego whooped with joy, laughter breaking the solemnity of the moment. As they pulled apart, Laura felt something lift from her, like every burden she had carried from Dallas had finally burned away. Luke took her hand, his eyes gleaming. "Welcome to a new life, Laura," he said, and she smiled. Knowing this wasn't just the end of a memory, it was the beginning of something real. Early autumn sunshine poured across the Harrison Ranch, lighting up the fields and sparkling off the glass greenhouse. The Wyoming air carried a crisp edge, mingling with the scent of fresh timber from a new wooden cabin rising at the edge of the property. Laura stood by the living room window, her hand resting gently on her stomach, a tender mix of awe and joy blooming inside her. Just days ago, she had discovered she was pregnant, a surprise that stirred something deep and indescribable in her. Since that kiss in the greenhouse, since the contract between her and Luke had dissolved, They had stepped fully into something real, and now this child was the living proof of that new beginning, a future she had never dared to dream. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her thoughts before telling Luke. She wasn't afraid of his reaction, just overwhelmed by how quickly life had changed from an abandoned bride to part of this land, part of Luke, and now a mother. She stepped outside, walking toward the construction site, where the wooden cabin was taking shape. Luke had begun building it just days ago, calling it a gift for you, built your way. He was there now, sleeves rolled up, sweat on his brow, hammer in hand. The professional security team still patrolled the grounds after the attack. But today, Luke wanted to build something with his own hands, like he was pouring himself into the walls of their new life. "Luke," she called, her voice trembling slightly. He looked up, dropped the hammer, and smiled when he saw her. "Is everything okay?" he asked, wiping his hands and hurrying over. Laura nodded, swallowed hard, then spoke quietly but clearly. "I'm pregnant, Luke. We're having a baby." For a moment, Luke froze, eyes wide with disbelief. Then a slow, radiant smile spread across his face, one Laura had never seen before. He pulled her into a tight embrace, his warmth wrapping around her completely. "Laura," he whispered, voice thick with emotion, "you just made me the happiest man alive." He stepped back, placing a gentle hand on her belly. His eyes shimmered. "We'll do this together. I promise." Tears welled in Laura's eyes. "I'm scared, Luke, but I'm also so happy. I want this baby to grow up in a real family." "You both will have that," Luke said, his grip tightening protectively around her hand. "I swear it." The cabin continued to take shape. Built by Luke's hands and guided by Laura's sketches, she designed it with large windows to catch the morning light, a warm fireplace, and open spaces meant for laughter and love. Luke often teased her about her detailed design requests, especially the built-in bookcase she insisted on. "Trying to turn this into a library already?" he joked one afternoon, hammering nails into a frame. Laura laughed, tossing a small scrap of wood at him. "This baby's going to grow up with stories, Luke. I want this house to be magical." He caught the wood with a grin, his gaze softening. "It already is, because you're in it." As the cabin rose, Laura found new purpose. She launched an online interior design class for women across rural Wyoming, wanting to help them turn simple homes into warm, personal sanctuaries. Just like she had done with the ranch kitchen, her first class took place in the living room, laptop open on the wooden table, sunlight shining through the beige curtains she once hung. Over a dozen women joined, single moms, curious teens, and homemakers seeking inspiration. Laura spoke with clarity and passion, sharing tips on color, layout, and how to breathe life into old spaces. "A home doesn't need to be expensive," she said. "It needs your heart." When one participant thanked her for giving them hope, Laura smiled with quiet pride, realizing that in teaching others, she was also healing herself. Luke stood in the doorway, watching silently. When the session ended, he stepped forward and placed a warm cup of tea beside her. "You were incredible," he said, pride shining in his eyes. "Those women are lucky to have you." Every evening, Laura and Luke sat by the fire, planning for the baby's future in the home they were building. Luke became a devoted father-to-be, devouring parenting books and even crafting a wooden cradle by hand. To Laura, he was no longer the cold man who once offered her a contract. He was her partner, her husband, and now the father of her child. One night, under a full moon streaming through the window, Laura felt the first flutter in her belly. She placed a hand there, eyes wide with wonder. Luke was beside her instantly. "Was that?" She nodded, eyes full of tears. "Luke, we're going to be a family." Luke took her hand and kissed it softly. "Laura, we already are." The cold light of the courtroom in the small Wyoming town glinted off the polished wooden benches. Laura sat in the front row, fingers tightly clasped, her gaze steady, though tension churned beneath her calm exterior. Across from her, James stood behind the defendant's podium. His expensive suit did little to hide the unease in his eyes. Today he faced serious charges: money laundering, property sabotage, and threats to life. Beside Laura sat Luke, calm but sharp-eyed, his stare fixed on James like a hunter tracking his prey. The case had begun with rumors James had planted in the press, accusing Luke and Laura's marriage of being a sham, an attempt to weaken Luke's legal claim over Harrison Ranch. But Luke, ever the strategic real estate CEO, had anticipated such a move. After the attack on the stormy night, he'd hired a private investigation team to dig into the Caldwell's dealings. Today, those findings would come to light. Luke's attorney, a sharp-witted woman with a commanding presence, rose. "Your Honor," she began clearly. "We present evidence showing the defendant, Mr. B.A.S., James Caldwell, conspired with a criminal group to sabotage Harrison Ranch in an illegal attempt to seize ownership. In addition, his financial records reveal a trail of offshore transfers indicative of money laundering." She laid out the evidence: forged contracts, recorded phone calls of James speaking to hired criminals, and security camera footage installed by Luke's private guards. James tried to maintain his confident smirk, but it slowly faded as the lawyer continued. "Furthermore," she added, "we have direct links between Mr. Caldwell and the attack on Harrison Ranch on October 15th, during which the lives of Miss Laura Bennett and Mr. Luke Harrison were endangered." Laura felt her chest tighten as her name was spoken, but she kept her chin high and eyes forward. She would not let James see her falter. The judge nodded solemnly and issued a detention order for James, pending further investigation. As police officers escorted him out of the courtroom, James turned, his eyes burning with fury. "You think you've won, Laura?" he growled. "You're just a pawn in Harrison's game." Laura rose slowly and walked toward him, her voice calm but sharp. "I've forgiven myself, James," she said, her words echoing in the stunned silence. "You don't matter to me anymore. You lost, not because of Luke, but because of your own greed." James looked stunned, speechless for once. Laura turned away and took Luke's hand, grounding herself in his steady presence. Luke gave her hand a reassuring squeeze, his eyes glowing with pride. "You did good," he whispered as they left the courthouse. "He can't touch us now." Laura smiled softly, a final weight lifting from her shoulders. That evening, the Harrison Ranch basked under the gentle light of the moon. Laura sat in the cozy living room she had redesigned. Beige curtains, vases of wildflowers, and soft lighting made it feel like home. Sophia brought out a tray of tea, and Diego tried to lighten the mood with jokes. But Laura only needed to look at Luke, seated beside her, to feel at peace. He stood and took her hand, leading her to the porch. Under the moonlight, he held her close, his voice low and steady. "I've been preparing for this day for a long time, Laura. I knew Caldwell wouldn't stop after Colorado, but I never expected you to be the one to bring him down. You didn't just protect this ranch, you protected us." Laura looked at him, heart pounding. "I didn't do it alone, Luke. You gave me a place to rise again, to become someone better. This isn't just your home anymore, it's ours." Luke smiled and pulled her into a warm embrace. "And it will be our child's home, too," he murmured, resting a hand gently on her growing belly. Laura leaned into him, peace washing over her like the breeze across the fields. James and the shadows of her past were nothing but distant memories now. The greenhouse at Harrison Ranch shimmered in the golden light of sunset. Strings of warm fairy lights hung like tiny stars, mingling with the scent of wildflowers and climbing vines. Laura stood before a makeshift mirror, dressed in a simple white silk gown, nothing extravagant like the one in Dallas, but full of grace, the kind born from a woman who had found herself again. Today she wasn't a runaway bride. She was strong, certain, and ready to step into the future with Luke Harrison. The ranch, once cold and silent, now thrived, thanks in part to the changes she'd made. From the cozy kitchen to the nearly finished wooden cottage where their child would grow up, Sophia, the kind-hearted housekeeper, helped adjust Laura's sheer veil, her eyes glistening. "You look like an angel, Laura," she whispered emotionally. "Luke's going to faint." Laura smiled and held Sophia's hand. "Thank you, Sophia. You're family to me now." But as Sophia stepped out, a soft knock came at the door. Laura turned, and to her surprise, her mother, Margaret, and her father, William, stood in the doorway. Margaret, in a pale blue dress, looked smaller than Laura remembered. "Laura," she said, her voice trembling, "I'm sorry for pressuring you. I only ever wanted you to be happy." William stood behind her, nodding, his eyes heavy with remorse. Laura took a deep breath, recalling the pressure her mother had placed on her to marry someone wealthy like James. But now, all she saw was a mother reaching out. "Mom, Dad," she said, walking over to embrace them. "I found my happiness. Thank you for coming." The moment of reconciliation was brief, but enough. It closed old wounds and allowed Laura to walk into her wedding with a lighter heart. Outside the greenhouse, the setup was simple yet intimate. Wooden chairs draped in white linen, a petal-strewn path leading to the altar. Sophia, Diego, Luke's security team, a few locals from Laura's design class, and her parents sat quietly, creating a warm, supportive atmosphere. Diego, now officiating the ceremony in a black suit, grinned wide. "I've never officiated a wedding before," he shouted, making everyone laugh. Luke stood at the altar in a deep gray suit, his eyes lighting up as Laura entered, hand in hand with her father. He was no longer the cold man who once proposed a marriage contract. Now he radiated devotion. As her father guided her to the altar, Laura felt the full weight of Luke's gaze, tender and unwavering, like she was his whole world. The ceremony began with soft guitar music from a local musician. Diego, cheerful yet respectful, spoke. "Today we witness the love of Luke Harrison and Laura Bennett, a love that outgrew contracts, endured trials, and overcame the past." Everyone chuckled warmly, and Laura glanced at Luke, who winked back. She spoke her vows first, her voice ringing clearly. "Luke, when I came here, I was just trying to escape, but you gave me a place to rise, to become who I truly am. I promise to give my heart fully, to build this family with you." She placed a hand on her belly, eyes shimmering with tears. Luke never looked away. Holding her hand, he spoke, his voice deep and sure. "Laura, I once thought all I needed was a legal wife to keep this ranch, but you are not just my wife. You're the reason I want to come home every day. You brought light into my life. I vow to protect you, love you, and build a home for our child with you." The silence that followed was thick with emotion. Even Margaret wiped her eyes, pride written across her face. Diego grinned. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." When Luke kissed Laura, the greenhouse erupted in applause. Their kiss was deep, certain, full of passion, no longer restrained by contracts or fear. Sophia hugged Laura with tears in her eyes, while Diego slapped Luke on the back, laughing. "You did it, amigo." After the ceremony, everyone gathered around the long wooden table, enjoying grilled meats, homemade bread, and wine. Margaret pulled Laura aside, her voice low. "I was wrong to pressure you, but you chose right, Laura." Laura hugged her mother, smiling. "Thank you for seeing that." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Luke and Laura stood together on the greenhouse porch, watching the orange light wash over the Wyoming hills. Luke pulled her close, resting his hand on her belly. "You've changed everything, Laura," he said softly. "I have you. I have our child. This is the family I never dreamed I'd get." Laura leaned into him, feeling a small flutter from the baby. "We built a home, Luke, and I'll be here every day with you." They stood there, shoulder to shoulder, bathed in twilight, ready for a future full of love.